amendments within the STEM in order vessels to report the annual fuel consumption. According to this proposal, ship operators, by the end of the reporting period, will need to submit to the flag administration the annual reports of fuel consumption, and the flag administration will need to transfer these annual values to the IMO ship fuel consumption database, and also it will be required an annual data report to be attached to the International Energy Efficiency Certificate. However, they have not decided yet whether these new measures will be implemented on a voluntary or mandatory basis. There are also some proposals by some flag administration to include in this system also energy efficiency indexes. However, already some entities, some industry stakeholders have expressed serious doubts regarding the introduction of efficiency metrics. European Union is, let's say, one step forward with the proposed EU monitoring and reporting verification. However, this will be covered later on in detail by Mr. Raptis. I would also like to note that here in Greece we are running a joint project with 5 major ship operators and trying to see how this could be implemented in a civil way without imposing further administrative burden. And this project is expected to be completed in about 6 months period. Regarding black carbon, we have the development here. Recently, the PPR2 subcommittee approved the definition of the black carbon. However, at this point of time, no control measures have been decided, but only studies on a voluntary basis for measurement of black carbon and gain experience with the definition. Moving to the Hong Kong Convention, it seems we are still far away from ratification. However, the amendments on the guidelines for the development of inventory of hazardous materials that are going to be adopted next month. There are amendments also on the threshold values. And on the other hand, the European Union has already applied the ship recycling regulation, which requests the inventory of hazardous materials and a statement of compliance to be issued in the near future for new and existing vessels as well. Regarding the Polar Code, the draft text of the Polar Code has been recently amended and it's ready for adoption at the next MEPC 68 next month, and will enter into force by 1st January 2017. And few words about the underwater noise. There is a very activity in this area. The guidelines have been circulated for the reduction of underwater noise from commercial shipping, and they are applicable on voluntary basis. And recently, Russia has proposed at the next MEPC 68 to be decided to include a work program regarding the evaluation of the underwater sound from shipping industry. And this will be evaluated by the Pollution Prevention and Response Subcommittee with a target completion by 1st January 2017. And actually, regarding this area, there's a lot of research also within ABS. However, we do not expect any mandatory regulation before 2020. And this completes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Dr. William Moore from the American P&I Lab, who will be giving us an update on the regulatory latest Green Regulatory Compliance Guide issued by the club.
Thank you very much. I never thought that I would call 9:20 in the morning early, but it feels early this morning. Having just flown in from New York a few days ago. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach and give you a little bit of different perspective from a P&I club with regard to environmental regulations, particularly as they relate to those of the United States. The United States in particular has very strict guidelines and requirements and also enforcement capabilities, and they do so with vigor, as we well know, okay? And as some of you actually may know and hear about in the news and in the press. But, oops, I went wrong direction. So just briefly, I'm going to talk about these few points, just an overview, given I have very short time in which to discuss them. Really talk about the realities of marine pollution, which we know quite a bit about, okay, as they relate to the general perspectives of what pollutes in the U.S., as well as where they point their attention in the U.S. on the shipowning community. Just brief comments about port state control and marine pollution and the focus of that. Also the history of oily water separators and some of the problems that we've seen with that, particularly on the violations and the enforcement side. And we still see that this is an issue. But also expand and discuss the range of environmental requirements for ship owners that we see in the United States. We've seen a growth of it. We've seen implementation, early implementation of certain issues. We've seen the ECA come into effect recently, the requirements of the North America ECA, and I'll just touch on those briefly. And I can never have a discussion without talking about the human element aspects of whether it's environmental issues, safety issues, security issues, they all have their impacts, and I will touch a moment on that and some of the problems and concerns we continue to see in our industry there. And also just briefly give an overview on the foreseeable trends and risks that we see in the U.S. in particular. Realities of marine pollution, we all know, and much to the chagrin and frustration of our industry, 80% of marine pollution comes from land-based sources. We see that, we see effects of it. In particular, what we call, in the United States, the most significant part of that comes from what we call non-point source pollution. They come from fertilizers, they come from herbicides, pesticides, primarily from runoff, farming runoff, septic tank systems, and so on, as you see that I've listed here. Airborne contaminants, that basically air pollution that, of course, due to precipitation, then goes onto the ground and into the water and into the marine environment. Motor vehicles, heavy metals. I'm not talking about heavy metal music, which is also a form of pollution, but I'm referring particularly about heavy metals actually in their actual form. It's interesting because we know that, in particularly our industry, which is very difficult, which is very simple, it's very easy to talk about our industry, maritime industry, because we are what they term as a point source form of pollution. We see it, we see the ships, we see the stack emissions, we see periodic pollution cases, the history of oil pollution, and so on. It's a very easy target for what is considered point source pollution or authorities. Criminal prosecutions and fines are severe in the United States. We have seen that. We read it in the newspaper. We know of some of our friends in this community and in the maritime community here in Greece have been affected by this directive, as well as elsewhere around the world. It is significant. It is a constant threat to our industry. What I would like to talk about just real briefly, I think is a very interesting point, and I've been thinking about this before preparing this presentation, is really thinking about how this is all expanded into our industry, where I think that we could always argue where it actually started. You could say it started with the Exxon Valdez, it post-Exxon Valdez with the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. At that point in time, there was a lot of focus, of course, on oil pollution from ships and the ships as cargo. Okay. Since that time, we've seen an expansion in all types of areas. Okay. Oil pollution from villages, of course, as it relates to oily water separators and the like, and magic pipes, as we've heard them called. That has been an issue. bunker fuel. Okay, now with the new bunker convention and the focus on bunker due to the size of ships and the size of and the volumes of bunker fuel, that heavy fuel oil that can be more dangerous than a crude oil spill of a much larger size, depending upon where it actually occurs. We've seen that. We've also seen the expansion and interest in the other parts of the Marpol Convention, looking at garbage, sewage, noxious substances, of course, invasive species with the ballast water, as we've just heard from Mr. Fradelos from ABS, brief summary of where we're going forward with that. Air pollution, NOx and SOx emissions. I put CO2 there, not a lot of energy put into requirements for ship owners for that at this point in time. But NOx and SOx have become quite an issue, and particularly SOx, as we've seen, particularly with the amendments for and most recently, at least in the U.S., as it relates to North America ECA. And what I'd like to call at the very end here, what we call holistic set of pollution sources, which I'll talk just briefly, mention the vessel general permit, U.S. EPA requirements, of basically everything on board ship, of any type of source that would be considered a potential pollution source. So it has expanded dramatically over the years. We are in the process of evaluating and trying to keep members, our ship owners, informed of how stringent the requirements will be enforced as they are expanded. But it's very important for us to make sure that we're keeping ship owners aware of what is actually required within the U.S. Just briefly, just want to make a point. It's obvious, it's clear, probably didn't even put the slide in here. Clearly the U.S. Coast Guard takes environmental matters into serious consideration as they are doing their port state control inspections. And they monitor it quite frequently. My apology, I didn't see the 2014 report, but it's very clear, annual report from the U.S. Coast Guard and the port state control, that environmental matters in general terms feature at the top of their list, first, second, or third, and I'm sure the 2014 is probably first or second again, okay? And I think it will continue to do so as there are more environmental pressures in the U.S., environmental regulatory pressures in the U.S. The reason why I want to just mention briefly the oil-to-water separator cases is that we have seen a number of them, particularly from a P&I perspective. We are not in a position where criminal violations, we can pay for criminal violations, although we've been presented with certain cases and looking at certain elements of these cases for reimbursement to members on a case-by-case basis. But the reason why I want to bring this up is that it continues to happen in our industry, okay? We see, when I was looking at most recent cases, I pulled up these cases that you see here in the middle with the Columbia Ship Management, Pacific International, H.Moore. These are happening still, even now, 2013, 2014, despite the fact that the first of these cases we've seen in 1994, and they are still occurring. There's still pressures on ship owners and crews. There's still a cultural issue within our industry, okay, for better or for worse. There's still a cultural issue with regard to seafarers as they violate and are looking for a payout, depending upon their backgrounds. And we know we've seen certain cases where ship owners have done everything that they can. And despite all that effort, that the violations are occurring and that the fines are being levied. So, with the very recently, particularly from our perspective, and a lot of feedback that we've received from ship owners who come to the U.S. regularly, as well as ship owners who actually come to the U.S. infrequently, are always asking us, can you give us a general overview of what the requirements are for ship owners for compliance with regulations in the U.S.? We do have an issue with regard, we are the United States. The United States was founded, unfortunately, in certain ways on states' rights. So despite the fact that in the U.S. they try to come up with one single solution, individual states can do what they wish. And we have seen, and as mentioned also by Mr. Fradelos earlier, about the what's going on in California, my home state, not my home state anymore, but my home state, continual additional requirements. We see that in other states from time to time, depending upon what occurs. But what we've focused attention on, particularly as it relates to environmental matters, we produced recently a Welcome to the United States, which we update periodically for our membership. But we most recently focused on these particular subjects. Of course, all the annexes of MARPOL, 1 through 6. Vessel General Permit. I don't know how many of you may have had an experience with that. That has become a big issue for us, okay? And we see enforcement extending upon that particular concern with regard to 26 various sources of pollution which need to be monitored, which need to be documented, and continual efforts put at ensuring compliance, as well as these other matters which are noted here, which I'm sure I can go into more detail, but I've just been told now I have about 30 seconds which to speak. Just briefly, we talk about this all the time. Management oversight, culture, crew competency, crew selection, training. Particularly from our perspective, we're now spending a lot of time and energy and focus on the concept of training as it relates to environmental compliance, particularly for ship owners. We do a lot of that in our efforts these days. And it's important for us from the P&I Club perspective that the types of claims that we see, the trends that we hear, we are basically recipients of a lot of information and can do that. I'm going to give it my time. I will just close with this slide. I will not say anything about it. I'm sure I don't need to say anything about it. They're all the matters that we see going forth. My apology. That's
with our next speaker, another subject, very pointed out by Stamatis Fradelos at the beginning, Benoit Lloyd, will speak on EU and IMO approach on ship recycling, actually. Benoit is coming from Brussels. He is Maritime Safety and Environmental Director of the European Community Shipowners Association.
Thank you, Mr. Benoit, for your welcoming words. So in the next 12 minutes, I will present you the EU ship recycling regulation, the concern we have in relation with this regulation, and also how to overcome them. So at EU level, the whole process on addressing the ship recycling started with the tentative application of the EU Waste Shipment Regulation, which is the translation into EU law of the Basel Convention on the transboundary movement of hazardous material. With the time, it has been evidenced that the Basel Convention has been inappropriately and inadequately designed for the recycling of ships, and this mainly for two reasons. The first one is that it's very difficult to determine when the ship becomes a waste, and also what country is actually exporting the ship. But with the adoption of the Hong Kong Convention in 2009, the parties to the Basel Convention agreed that the Hong Kong Convention provides an equivalent level of control than the Basel Convention. And this allowed in 2012 the EU Commission to make a proposal on an EU regulation for on ship recycling, which eventually entered into force in December 2013. So even if the regulation has entered into force, it's not of application yet. So the EU regulation reflects two great extent the requirement of the International Hong Kong Convention, and also very importantly allow the recycling of EU flagship in non-OECD countries. As you may know, the EU regulation is flag neutral when it comes to the obligation for all ships visiting EU ports to have an inventory of hazardous material on board, but it's directed only to EU flagship when it comes to the recycling operation itself, and also that EU flagships are excluded from the scope of the EU waste shipment regulation. So, but in practice, because the Hong Kong Convention has not entered into force yet, and because the EU regulation is not of application, the member states and also shipowners are increasingly facing application of this wrongly appropriate Basel Convention. And an additional requirement under the EU regulation is that the Commission by December 2016 will have to provide the Member States and the Parliament with a report on the feasibility of a financial instrument facilitating the safe and environmentally sound recycling of ships, to be possibly accompanied by a legislative proposal. And basically the aim of this financial mechanism would be to avoid easy circumventing of the EU regulation by flagging out. And that's why, for a level playing field, the ratification of the Hong Kong Convention is really needed. Because ships will have no other option than being recycled in facilities being Hong Kong compliant. So, as I told you, the EU regulation has several application dates that are listed at the end of this presentation for your information. And we believe that the EU regulation can play a key role in the ratification process of the Hong Kong Convention. As you may know, the major recycling states are located in South Asia, where 70% of the recycling activity take place in intertidal zones, which the intertidal zones is something that is covered by the EU regulation. But what we are experiencing now is that the major recycling states, but also the flag states, are playing a game of hide and seek to whom will be the first ratifying the Hong Kong Convention. And for this, the entry into force of the International Convention is subject to a prolonged period. And we believe that the current development at EU level, and especially at the EU Commission level, are currently very counterproductive. Because EU ship, as you may know, EU flagship, as you may know, will have to be recycled in approved facilities by the European Commission. And with this view, with this aim, the Commission is elaborating on guidance, the guidance document that includes interpretation going beyond the current requirement of the regulation. So this guidance aims at facilitating the inclusion on the EU list of approved facilities, but in fact is disincentivizing any ship recycling facilities situated in intertidal zones to apply to the EU regulation. So basically, implicitly, the EU, through this guidance document, is putting a ban on bleaching, which is not covered by the International Convention. So I would like to make it clear here that EXA intention is not to promote the bleaching method as it stands now, because we know that the occupational safety and health matter are not ideal at this stage. But a failure to provide an incentive to some model yards that have the potential to be included on the EU list may create a two-tier ship recycling market worldwide. And this is the last thing we want. And the inclusion or not of ship recycling facilities on the EU list, according to us, should not be preempted by any EU guidance document, and each facility using any methods and located anywhere should be addressed on a case-by-case basis, and also the progress made towards compliance with the Hong Kong requirement should be monitored. And a potential solution to this is indeed to make use of the verification and approval requirements under the EU regulation, which can play a strategic role in motivating those facilities to apply at least, and possibly to be included on the EU list. And this will also provide a breeding ground towards the ratification of the international convention. But, of course, this cannot work without active action and responsible behavior during the interim period before the full application of the EU regulation and the entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention. So, the interim period could be breached by the use of the EU list, the facilities that are listed already on the list of approved facilities, and also by having on board ships an inventory of hazardous material, which would avoid to a great extent the application of the Basel Convention. And this will also give an important move forward to a worldwide level playing field. And of course, shipowners have a responsibility to ensure that their ships are recycled in a safe manner, especially during the interim period. And to this end, EXA has provided the shipping industry with some recommendation. There are 6 in total that are listed in a policy paper that is available on our website. And for example, one of these recommendations is that shipowners should monitor any individual ship recycling operation and undertake any recycling project with a view at improving standards in line with the Hong Kong Convention. And this bring us to the conclusion of the presentation. The first one is that the swift ratification of the Hong Kong Convention is crucial to ensure a level playing field at a global level, and also to ensure a unique regime worldwide. The European regulation on ship recycling can play a strategic role in this process if the application process is maintained open, and also encourage any efforts made to be Hong Kong compliant. And last but not least, proactive action and responsible behavior are required during the interim period. So as I told you, the EXA policy paper is available on our website for further information. In the next slides, you will find the different application dates of the EU regulation. This is for your information. And I thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions.
We move on to our next speaker, Sotiris Raptis. Sotiris is a Brazilian guy, Greek guy. He's part of the brain drain which happened taking place in Greece. He is based in Brussels. He works for Transport and the Environment, and he will be talking on EU MRV.
Thank you for the invitation. The subject of my presentation is the EU MRV regulation. I have been following the developments on the MRV from the very beginning when I was a policy advisor in the European Parliament. For those who are not familiar with the MRV regulation, MRV stands for Monitoring, Reporting and Verification of the CO2 emissions from the maritime transport. Let me say just a few words about my organization. Transport and Environment is a Brussels-based environmental group focusing on sustainable transport with 46 member organizations in 24 countries. Our main focus is on climate change and air pollution, and we're involved in the regulatory process at EU and international level with regard to the CO2 standards, reduction targets, and fuel quality. Transport and Environment participates and actively contributes to the IMO process. We participate in the MEPC and the relevant correspondence groups. We actively contribute to the correspondence group on the fuel availability review, on the implementation of the global 0.5 sulfur limits. We also contribute to the correspondence group on the establishment of a global MRV system and the EEDI review. Just a few words about the EU MRV regulation, about the background of this new law. The EU MRV is part of the EU strategy which was announced back in 2013 as a first step towards a reduction target and measures to implement this target. With regard to the state of play on the adoption of the EU MRV, the final vote is next Tuesday. The new EU law will be finally and officially adopted by the plenary of the European Parliament next week. And just a brief comment, it's a regulation, not a directive, and which means that it doesn't need to be transposed into national law. It has a direct effect, and it enters into force on 1st of July 2015. Operation, of course, from 2018. The next milestones for the implementation of the MRV is the establishment of the two consultation groups by the European Commission for the adoption of the implementing and the delegate acts on the verification process and the definition of cargo carried for some ship types. When it comes to the scope of the new EU MRV system, in a phrase, it's all about transparency. The two main pillars of the new law is the collection of data on the CO2 emissions and the fuel efficiency of the ships. The main characteristic of the system is full transparency. All the information will be published per ship name. The system is flag neutral, meaning that it covers all ships calling at EU ports, and it excludes small emitters and special ship types. It focuses only on CO2, and the fuel efficiency is expressed by 6 different metrics. It's interesting to look at the international dimension of the EU MRV system. As I have already mentioned, all ships calling at EU ports will be covered by the EU rules, which means probably more than 70% of the global fleet, which means that the new EU law is effectively a global measure. The second implication is that the new regulation provides the EU with a legal basis to speak for the first time with one voice in the IMO, especially on fuel efficiency and energy efficiency issues. As a result, all EU member states have submitted to the next MEPC in May in London a joint paper supporting the idea that an EU-style MRV system could be easily transferred and transposed into international law. And when it comes to the IMO process, I have to say that there is a lot of reluctance, and many observers, many stakeholders, observers and members of the organization have expressed their unwillingness to consent to the collection of data when it comes to the fuel efficiency. Thus, it's still quite uncertain if the global system will be mandatory or voluntary, and whether it will cover also fuel efficiency. On this slide, you can see all the data, all the information that will be reported and published by the European Commission on a yearly basis. You can see that this information includes the identity of the ship, the EEDI scores, for the first time, the annual CO2 emissions, the fuel consumption, distance traveled, cargo carried, and total time spent at sea per ship name. Why this regulation is so important? Because transparency means fuel efficiency. The MRV regulation will make available for the public, for the policymakers, and for the cargo owners what some voluntary initiatives already do. You can see, for example, the Clean Shipping Index, the Right Ship. There are voluntary initiatives of the ship owners and cargo owners who exchange information in the procurement process. And if you look at the Clean Shipping Index, you can find many big multinational companies from the car industry, for example, Volkswagen, from the big global retailers, H&M, who participate and exchange information with the ship owners. Why cargo owners are so interested? Because transparency means fuel efficiency. They pay the cost, the fuel cost, and they are also able to advertise to their consumers the greening of their supply chain. What is coming up next? Shipping is the only sector of the EU economy currently not covered by the EU reduction targets. Shipping emissions, global shipping emissions, have increased by approximately 70% since 1990. And what the third greenhouse gas panel found is that the increase in shipping emissions will be up to 250% by 2050. What this study also found is that the increased transport demand will offset any efficiency gains resulting by the implementation of the EEDI targets. What we urgently need is a reduction target at EU and at international level. If we are serious about creating a level playing field among the different sectors of the economy, if we are serious about fighting against climate change, and if we are ready to listen to what science says about the level of the risk climate change poses to the environment and our economies, it's fair to say that it's time for the shipping sector to pay its contribution and to make its contribution and to pay its share to this fight. Thank you for your attention.
Our next speaker, Klaus Grensemann. Klaus is chairman of QACE. He will be explaining to us what they do and what the purpose of this organization is. And he will be picking on the arrow monitoring the role of his organization towards sustainable shipping travel.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, within the next 12 minutes or until the alarm sounds, I'm trying to explain to you a relatively new entity on the market with obviously some impact on general ship safety, the protection of the marine environment, and on sustainable shipping in general. Ladies and gentlemen, in case you are not properly following the next 10 or 12 minutes, don't despair. I know about colleagues who haven't got it within 12 months. In my presentation, I'm following the outlined scheme to illustrate the legal background, the partners, the way we are performing our job, and our means to tell you, the consumers, in the end, about achievements and areas where improvement is necessary or at least advisable. Before I start to explain what QACE is, I'm telling you what QACE is not. QACE is for sure not a European entity, and QACE is by far not a subsidiary of Ajax. You will later easily understand what I mean by this. The entity for the quality assessment and certification of organizations recognized by the European Union, QACE, was founded in November 2010 by the then 12 recognized organizations. In short, I'm using ROs for recognized organizations or classification societies. These are the class societies as long as they are not recognized somewhere. Through the arrangement of an independent board of directors serving as a kind of a cofferdam, or sometimes I'm using membrane, between the operative part of the entity and the members, the ROs, the independence of the operative part of the company is ensured. QACE is a not-for-profit company registered in England with an office in London. The members, inter alia, are in charge for the funding with an annual budget of some £500,000 sterling. QACE's job in principle is to police the members that are all recognized in the EU. The entity started its operation in the beginning of 2011, a rather short time after the foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are mainly representing ship owners, I need not to tell you that international shipping is governed by a plethora of rules and regulations safeguarding the safety at sea, an unimpaired marine environment, and a sustainable shipping in general. There are a lot of schemes and institutions monitoring the compliance with international laws, but almost all of them are covered by the activities of the classification societies. As these societies have a key role in the safe operations of ships, they are subject to the EU Regulation 391 of 2009 of the European Parliament and of the Council of 23rd April 2009. The basic principle for the foundation and the operation of QACE is stipulated in Article 11 of the regulation. At the moment, there are 11 ROs members of QACE who are all Ajax societies. IRS, that is the Indian Register of Shipping, who is already Ajax, is expected to join QACE in due course. The board of directors consists of 5 members from Japan, the People's Republic of China, Greece, France, and Germany. Board members, as a precondition, shall not have any current connection to any classification society. The staffs comprise an executive secretary, an administration officer, and 4 subcontracted assessors. The executive secretary and the administration officer are English, the assessors are from Taiwan, India, England, and Germany. As you can see from this, QACE is truly international. The way it is organized ascertains its independence from external influence, in particular from ROs, Ajax, or last not least, the European Commission and its services like EMSA. The oversight over the classification society's quality, safety, and pollution standards are done by internationally recognized accredited certification bodies, the so-called ACBs. The individual societies' offices and the field surveys are formally audited in accordance to their size with ISO 9001 and a set of marine standards which have been developed by Ajax and named Quality Systems Certification Scheme. The prescribed number of these audits are randomly assessed by QACE. On average, we have between 30 to 40 assessments per year. The final product of QACE's activities will be a certificate assigned to the Classification Society performing to procedural and auditing standards prescribed by QACE. The justification for this is again defined in the EU Regulation 391. At the moment, we are signing tripartite agreements between QACE, the ROs, and their relevant ACBs to ensure the contractual foundation for the certification. By the end of the year, we will have issued certificates for all our members. The focus assessment areas for the current year, resulting from the experience gained during the previous years, are among others the statutory certification and the accuracy of issued certificates. In the years before, our focus areas inter alia consisted of passenger ship fire safety, mobile offshore units, lifeboat and life raft service suppliers, or the Maritime Labour Convention. The annual report for 2014 for the last year will be issued this month. The annual report gives an account of the operation during the last year and contains collective recommendations to our members. In addition to these collective recommendations, there are individual recommendations given in private meetings. These meetings are not only private, but as well confidential. The annual report 2014 will be made available as the reports before, for example, to those who are attending the Maritime Safety Committee meeting at the IMO next time in London in June. It is meant to be used by all interested parties. In case you feel concerned, what you obviously are, you can freely download all reports issued so far from our website. And with that, I'm looking forward to a lively discussion, but before I give the floor to the next speaker, I would like to congratulate Apostolos Pilokas and his team on the organization of such a professional event. Thank you very much.
Now we move to the next speaker for this session. That would be Panayiotis Mitrou. Panayiotis is working for Hellenic Lloyd, but he will speak in this slot about Poseidon Med, the Med seat in the gas era. An interesting topic, and I think some of the developments in the future development we've seen in the Hellenic. So, Anna, the floor is yours.
Okay. So, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about sustainability, Poseidon Med is the project which aims to revive the shipping sector in the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean area, and lead it to a new era, what we call the gas era, through a smooth transition. It is about planning and having the whole solution in order to move forward. So, we will see how and why this new era may constitute a great opportunity for our area in particular. So, we can see there's turmoil ahead. We have in our area, and we're not talking about ECAS now, the EU and the global sulfur cap, which will come in 2020 and potentially 2025. And we will see there a gap, a potential gap being constituted between 2020 and 2025 for our region in the Mediterranean. On the other hand, we have EEDI, we have MRV as we already seen, and potential market-based measures which will further put pressure on shipping. So, what is the European Union case? We have refineries being reluctant in the investment needed for desulfurization of fuels, especially in the European Union due to environmental legislation. We see the margins now being exhausted. On the other hand, on a well-to-wheel or proper, in our case, basis, desulfurization of fuel will increase greenhouse gas emissions. So there is controversy on the alternative solutions and the conventional fuels. And of course, there is also ambiguity on solutions like scrubbers. We have seen some criticism. It's not something concrete, but there are still problems there. So, what is yet again the case of the EU? The EU owns a fleet around 48% of the global fleet. It has more than 40% of the global marine equipment manufacturers. It is a dominant stake for the whole world. So there is great interest in the EU in having a solution. And on the other hand, what has the EU already done on this field? There are a number of policies about sulfur directives, energy security, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, like MRV, the diversification of energy sources, the alternative fuels directive, the competitiveness of the transportation sector, especially the shipping sector, the interconnection with remote areas in Europe, and finally, quite lately, the macro-regional strategies with the Adriatic and Ionian region as well. So we see a number of projects being now developed around Europe, and we see that there is a lack of such initiatives in the southern part of Europe and the EU. So, what about LNG? What is LNG? Is it a solution? Is it a prospect? Or a lifetime opportunity? It is true that LNG may offer a holistic solution to the environmental aspects. It practically extincts greenhouse gas emissions, CO2. It will extinct as well particulate matters, and to some extent it solves to some extent the CO2 and the NOx emissions. It extincts sulfur oxides and particulate matters. On the economic side, we have huge changes in supply, with the US shale gas being available for exportation now, the Australia's new supply, the Russia-China pipeline, and the Japan's destined view to nuclear energy again after Fukushima disaster. So we have good news for the supply and demand aspects of LNG. And on the other hand, we have the strategic reasons, the abundant resources of LNG, the diversification of our other fuels, the political risk hedging, and a reliable supply chain working now for a number of decades. So, we also see criticism as well. There are a number of what we could call myths. First myth is LNG may not be safe. The answer to that is that we have a proven safety record beyond doubt for many decades for LNG and natural gas. And we have applications of natural gas all around us already, with perfect, quite good safety record. We also say that LNG requires a huge investment, a very costly infrastructure. This is true, but it pays back well, and there are excellent synergies with the shore energy sector as well. And the latest myth, we could say myth, that LNG is not competitive under low oil and HFO price. We must say here that an efficient LNG market is currently developing, is still under development. In the case of shale gas, bunker equivalent can reach $50 per ton of HFO. This is something you cannot compete with HFO. The 0.5 sulfur cap minimum cost will also put pressure and will amount to an additional $150 for HFO. And of course, we have the amortization factor that will strengthen the LNG position, an additional benefit that may stem from further regulatory changes. So, how do we come to LNG? We have set up a number of partners, the POSEIDON Med project, which is the first cross-European project which aims to introduce LNG as the main fuel in the area, and it at the same time sees the sufficient infrastructure as well as the demand side. It focuses in the Eastern Mediterranean region, with all 5 EU member states in the region being part of this, and it is a partnership between gas suppliers, shipping companies, port authorities, technical organizations, etc. It is officially included as a candidate project in the newly developed Juncker package. So, about the barriers. What are the barriers we're trying to address? First one is infrastructure. We are developing a hub-and-spoke hub in Piraeus, and we will perform risk assessment, a review of operation, establishing safety in port for Piraeus and Limassol in the first phase. And we will also have 6 vessels reviewed for gas readiness approval in principle level, and 2 among them will be in more detail, while there will also be a feasibility study for an LNG barge conversion. What is important here is that we have to do with a non-existing regulatory framework, so we have to work from scratch. We see what the solutions have been in Northern Europe and elsewhere, and we're making a comparison with all current bodies that are working on the regulatory framework for LNG as marine fuel. And of course, I would say most of all, we're also working on the development of a sustainable model for financing according and with the assistance of all EU financing instruments, taking into account the particular and very severe Greek market and other countries in the area conditions. So, working towards sustainability, what are the next steps ahead? In the next phase, which is a running proposal right now, we will have the first pilot vessel, LNG fueled, to be operated in the Mediterranean area, a pilot vessel, an innovative vessel that will be built for Venice port, and it will be funded with 50%, this is a projection, 50% grant by the European Union. We will also see 10 and more vessels, approval in principle and detailed review, including both new buildings and retrofits. We will continue on with the follow-up and the specific actions of the regulatory framework for POSEIDON Med first phase, and we will see that all gap analysis results are taken into account. And of course, we will perform the same study and enhance the study for 5 core ports in the area. And one last thing that has been also included in our effort is shipyard preparedness, carrying out a gap analysis for as to see what are the gaps and what are the incentives for shipyards in the area to be destined for this new sector. So, what we see out of this, what are the objectives of the project? We see a significant reduction of emissions, especially in adversely affected coastal areas like Piraeus and the city of Piraeus. The fostering of competitive maritime transportation, the notable introduction and application of technological expertise to strengthen the maritime and the shipping sector. We will see out of this an improvement in transportation cost, safeguarding of the industry and the country. We must say here that shipping for the country is a jewel, and we have to safeguard this through smooth harmonization with future key challenges in this case. We'll also see potential and revival of the shipbuilding sector in new sectors like LNG, cryogenics, etc. And of course, there is much potential in synergies with small-scale LNG and the shore energy sector. We have already seen Greece as it stands. We have no grid for Western Greece. Patras is quite an opportunity there. And on the other hand, we have the islands We don't mean we're going to bunker LNG in the islands, but there is great potential in synergies for small-scale LNG and barges to also supply LNG in plants in the islands, or especially small energy plants in the Greek islands. So that was it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Remain within these 20 minutes allocated time slot. Before we open the questions to the floor, I have a few questions myself. Starting with this, I would like to point out a question about the ECA monitoring policy. There's a policy in the EU. Actually, there's no policy, actual policy in the EU. The lack of this policy, that's a policy itself. And we have a policy, a more robust policy in the USA. I would like to ask you what is your feedback with this policy, especially in the EU waters. We see the European Union developed a lot of legislation in several issues. It's not only ship recycling, it's not only MRV, it's a number of issues. But EU has so far failed to develop a concrete policy like the US. So what is your feedback and what do you expect? There are rumors, especially from the Scandinavian countries, that the competition is being distorted because there's no level playing field. The reason is that any, let's say, ship operator can enter the North-European ECA without actually implementing properly the new rules, thus having the benefit of this, let's say, deviation from the rules. So what is your feedback and what should we expect, starting from Stamatis?
Yes, most probably you are referring to the 0.1 sulfur content within the ECAs. A few months ago, there was a meeting within the EU Parliament and the EU Council, and also I have participated in this meeting, and actually there was an agreement there that additional measures and controls have to be implemented by the posted control officers in Europe, especially in the North European countries, and concerns have been also expressed about competition and the gains a ship owner that will have for non-compliance with the sulfur content limits. And there's already, let's say, instructions and controls that in a draft form that will be implemented by the officers. And there was recently a stakeholders meeting between this European country and the US Coast Guard and EPA. And additional measures are going to be implemented very soon to ensure that there will be compliance with the sulfur limits. They are also talking about the introduction of new technologies like sniffers, and soon we are going to see measures towards this direction.
I understand that there was an example recently pointed out. If we take a Panamax, for example, entering the SECA zone in the English Channel, to reach Rotterdam, that will take 3.5 days, with a fuel consumption of approximately, let's say, 30 tons a day, and the price differential of approximately, let's say, $200 between HFO and MGO. That would give each leg 4 days times 30 metric tons fuel per day, 120 metric tons, giving a benefit of approximately $24,000 for each leg, inbound and outbound. That's approximately $100,000 entering and going out of the ECA. So that's a huge benefit, that's a huge, let's say, incentive for those who are willing to bend the rules. So there was this example was pointed out recently, but it's a huge, let's say, incentive. So we have to see what will happen in the EU.
Yes, and recently we have seen the EPA policy to the fines, and actually there will be some similar measures in Europe to define stricter fines for non-compliance.
Your feedback on the task? I understand it's a new rule, it's newly recently enforced, so do you have any sort of feedback?
Well, the feedback that we receive it's a little more difficult. The feedback, a lot of the feedback you've been seeing is actually in the press with regard to, in particular with fines and like. But on the ECA, to date, we have not had a lot of direct feedback from our shipowners, to be perfectly frank, within this short time period. Similar to the issues, sorry to sidetrack, but like what we've seen with the MLC, we've been collecting more information on the experiences that shipowners have had. The one thing, just to make note of, particularly from a P&I perspective, okay, all these gentlemen clearly who have spoken today are very much involved in the implementation of all these requirements. From a P&I perspective, and from my perspective within our club is very much focused on the loss prevention and bringing information to ship owners as far as what the requirements actually are. The implementation, the details of the problems that are seen, particularly with the new fuel oils. ABS has written some very good documentation or very good guidance on that. We've seen that from DNV and others too. We hear a lot about the types of fines that we've seen. We've seen some excessive types of activities within the United States. In particular, we've now been informed that we have drones which are actually looking at stack emissions and going over ships in California. There's rumors of that, and actually seen pictures of that. They're actually measuring the emissions from stacks. So that's pretty high tech and pretty serious. But it's a little difficult for me to talk about that at this point in time with regard to the fine elements of it. And I wish I could give you a better answer, but within the 6 months, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it. But from our perspective, we have not heard a lot about it. Okay. But it is an issue, and we do address it because many fines that we see, in particular, as I mentioned just briefly there, fines in our industry, we cover fines under P&I, of course. There are certain fines. But if there's something that's criminal, and defined as criminal, our hands are tied behind our backs as a P&I club. It's a very, very difficult thing for shipowners, that their clubs cannot assist them in those particular activities. So it's up to us to actually try to bring these things to attention on the prevention side. Okay, sorry, to give you a better answer on that.
Okay, it's a recent development. Benoit, any, let's say, extra position on this? I know you are having a lot of work on this issue.
Yes, of course, and it's a bit too early to have proper feedback on the implementation of the SURF directive, of course, but we got already some comprehensive feedback from member states themselves, not only on the non-compliant situation, intentional one, but also operational one, like contamination issue or blackout issue, and also non-availability issue that also will be solved, I guess. And the extra position is indeed that a fair enforcement is needed for the reason you explained. And as mentioned by Mr. Fradelos, there is a legal text now requiring member states to make a minimum amount of ship inspection on a yearly basis in EU ports, but also as from 2016 the obligation to perform sampling. But of course all these controls take place in ports, and we believe that the remote sensing is one of the solutions for fair enforcement. Not only mainly because of the dissuasive effect of remote sensing, and this remote sensing is also recognized as a method of enforcement.
Okay, we've been recently in a conference in Copenhagen talking about the drones. Can you update us on the cost of the drone? And say, is it going to happen? So what do you think?
We'll start with that. What we know is that the Commission and the Member States have been too late in the implementation of the directive. The deadline for the transposition of the directive was last June. and the Commission now is preparing a compatibility review to check the level of the fines of the Member States. Of course, it's not only the EU Commission, it's up to the Member States first to define the appropriate level of the penalties. After the compatibility review, the Commission will prepare a review of the penalties. What has happened in the meantime is the adoption of an implementing act on the frequency of the checks, which sets up a minimum number for the Member States. If I remember well, 10% of the total annual calls, and from this number, if I remember well, 40% should be fuel sampling in the SEC areas.
You remember correct, but this is the target, pointed out.
But it's legally binding for the Member States.
No, I mean it's a permitting target. This is what I mean.
Probably.
Yeah.
We have to see it. And just to remind that 6 Member States have been brought to the European Court by the Commission, but again the Commission doesn't know the level of the penalties if those Member States have properly transposed the directive. Of course, there are some projects in Denmark. Denmark is one of the most progressive Member States in the implementation of the directive. They have earmarked some million euros in the implementation of the directive, and they have a pilot project with drones. But again, the problem is that we don't know whether those checks are eligible in a court, because it's not the market sample.
Yeah, there are very bad problems in this implementation, and taking the example I gave earlier on, if you have a benefit, let's say an incentive of $50,000, what would be a possible fine? At the moment, the fines are in the range of 5,000 to 10,000 euros, whatever, in North European. So that's a huge incentive. If you go to the US, from the other hand, let's say the equivalent penalty, to put it this way, is either equal or more. 95% would be more, maybe 1.5 times the savings. That's a totally another approach. So we have to work a lot, especially in the EU. So, Klaus, do you have any sort of feedback on this with monitoring the classification sites and the feedback you received so far on the issue?
Of course I have. Thank you, Chair. As I told you before, QACE is completely independent from the European Union, but on the other hand, we have means to observe what's going on in the EU and in particular in the European Commission. And some of you may have realized as well that in the year before they changed horses to quite a number, and in particular in very important positions. And what my observation is, and what I get from the contacts we have to the Commission and to EMSA is that they are gaining speed in putting more stress on the fulfillment of regulations, and not only in the field of what is related to the classification societies and to our business, but in general. And so what you could expect from them is that they in future will be more vigilant and more alert to breaches of rules and regulations. Thank you.
Okay. And Panos, besides the fact that if you use LNG you don't have any sort of problem like that, do you have any feedback on the issue?
The only thing that I could add is that we need to be, the competition must work, and so there must be the same rules for everyone. Yes, there must be also ways to monitor things and ensure that everyone complies. Perhaps the feedback we also get and the overall, let's say, picture is that all the steps have not been taken already, but so far I understand that from any sampling done in Northern Europe, any non-conformances have been quite minimum. But of course, we're not sure what happens out in the open. So, okay, we must apply all the ways, all the manners to ensure that the ECA zone regulation is implemented in all its area.
Okay, and I have one other brief question for you. There's a lot of developments in the LNG sector. We've seen a couple of weeks ago the takeover of a BG group by Shell, and we've seen the first trip from China to Bergen of a vessel using LNG. What do you see out of these developments, briefly, in the LNG segment? Because gas, for many industry insiders, is considered, let's say, the future fuel.
Yes. LNG is considered to be, I would say, not niche. Its current development is so minimal you couldn't even use the word niche. But there are a number of developments like the ones you've mentioned, especially the trip, which is a symbolism. It's not okay. It's not it was not a voyage that was under charter or something. It was just the transportation of the vessel to the Nordic areas. But it's a symbolism that this could occur for an only gas-fueled vessel. And we have also seen, what perhaps is quite surprising is a few weeks ago we have seen a vessel being built, constructed and finalized in Italy, in our area, and then in its maiden voyage to Canada, where it's going to serve the lines there. We have also seen Shell ordering an LNG bunkering vessel in Korea in order to serve Rotterdam. Of course, with regards to consolidation and the move of Shell and British Gas, perhaps we see that there is some crisis and there are some problems in the sector, so consolidation may be the way forward. But we also see that despite the fall of prices, there is still commitment. The commitment has not changed, and the developments are occurring at the same pace as before the reduction of prices, with an exception of one or two cases.
Okay, thank you, Panos. Now it's time to open the questions to the floor. Do we have any questions from the floor? You just raise your hand and you have the opportunity to... Yes? Oh, Panos. You have a microphone over there.
Congratulations, Fradelos. I came a little late.
That's why you're over there, right?
So, I have two questions for two of the presentations. I'll mention them by subject because I don't want to be personal. One is the EU MRV and the other one is QACE. For the EU MRV, some people say that operational indices of ships like EOI, EVI, and so on are garbage. I disagree. Garbage is something that's useless. I think they're worse than garbage in that they're dangerous and deceiving. In other words, you can have those indices point to a ship as being efficient when in fact it's not efficient. And even in my fleet, I have this kind of ships where the EOI is worse, shows worse for the ship that actually burns less fuel, everything else cargo being equal. So if I present the low EOI to my charters to entice them to charter my ship, it's like I'm deceiving them. So, knowing this huge problem, I wonder why is EU insisting on using this kind of indices? Why do we need MRV? to me, MRV has no reason of existence unless, of course, your final objective for MVM is ETS, in which case you need MRV. But of course, a much fairer system, from my perspective, would be to just apply as an MVM a tax on fuel. The efficient ship burns less fuel, pays less tax. So why would the EU insist on an MRV? The official excuse is we need to know how much CO2 shipping is producing and all that. But we already have 3 huge IMO studies telling us the exact same thing. So that's my question.
That's okay. That's clear. And I have something on this. I follow your argument. I'm just pointing out another question at the moment. Why should the industry be afraid of, let's say, possible MVM? I'm just asking. If you do the math, you know the math very well, it's 1 billion tons of fuel. This is more or less the emissions for shipping. At the moment, in you know that EU ETS have collapsed recently. The prices were approximately 3 euros per ton. Now it's 7 euros per ton. We're talking about 7 euros per ton. Either it would be a market-based measure, 7 euros per ton, or a bunker levy. It's the same. Why on earth the shipping industry should be afraid of the possible MVM? I'm just following your, I do understand what you're asking. I'm just asking another question, which I think is a rhetorical one. Why should the industry be afraid of the possible MVM? It's not about the huge amounts of money, but we have to pay. Either way, we have to pay. But I follow your...
I have an answer. It's not a matter of being afraid for an MVM or not afraid for an MVM. It's the fact that the ETS is so hugely complicated.
Yeah, it is.
You need to have
Extreme, yes,
books and all that.
yes. But even, but you know you know the ongoing discussion in the IMO. Even the bunker levy is a very complex rule to implement.
Once you get it as a regulation, then to implement it is very simple. It's the legal issue.
Okay. And the second question for the
now QACE. I want to be a little provocative in order to have a provocative answer. If, to me it seems that if QACE was doing its job, it should have already closed down all the classification societies. Why are they open? And they violate
They are good people,
so as
probably.
they don't follow their own regulation with construction of ships. How come we don't hear anything about it?
Klaus?
So that's it.
Klaus? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I love provocative questions because they can be answered in a provocative way. Of course, you are right. If we were the super classification society, we did not need any RO apart from us. But actually, that is not QACE's job to supersede the societies, but just to police and to oversight them. And what we are doing is only to check and to control the quality management system of the society in conjunction with the performance of the accredited certification body. And that's it, period. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Sotiris, do you have any comment on the MRV?
Yeah.
There's an ongoing discussion.
First of all, the EU MRV hasn't decided on the metrics. There is no EEOI in the EU MRV. There's just 6 metrics. There are the figures that should be monitored and reported.
Okay, what is Panos saying? I mean, let me interpret it another way. The metrics are there, it's more or less the same. It's not actually, it's not named over there, but it's more or less the same.
No, it's not the same.
It's more or less the same. I'm not saying it's the same.
I disagree. It's not the same. It's up to everybody to decide the metric, and all this data will be public. This is the first step. I'm not following the argument why the EU shouldn't have adopted the MRV, because the MRV is the first step for a reduction target. How the EU will set up a reduction target without an MRV? And secondly, this is the debate at IMO level as well. It's not only the EU isolated in the world deciding on the MRV. It's an ongoing discussion at IMO level, and in this discussion, all these metrics that have been discussed and decided and adopted at EU level are still under consideration.
Correct. And Panos, I don't know if you lost it at the beginning. Stamatis, can you repeat what is the latest proposal in the MEPC? Panos, in the next MEPC we discussed about the flag states. Can you repeat it briefly? He said it at the beginning, most probably we were here.
Yes.
There is a proposal.
Yes, actually, there is the report of the correspondence group on enhancing of energy efficiency, and they are proposing amendments into the SEM to include a methodology. Based on this methodology, ship operators will need to monitor and reporting their fuel consumption, not CO2 emission. They are not talking about verification, but at the end of its reporting year, they will need to send the fuel consumption report to the flag administration, and within three months, and the flag administration will need to transfer the fuel measurement report to the IMO database, and there will be an amendment in the International Energy Efficiency Certificate with the annual report.
For those certificates, that's actually an MRV without the V. There's no verification, there's no certification to put this. But it's the same. It's the same.
Yes, and also there's the
I'm sorry, it's not the same. IMO is moving towards the right direction, and I think the EU is trying to undermine IMO and have IMO move towards the EU direction. As far as the indices, they are already decided. They are in the regulation. Once you ask for cargo and everything else that the EOI formula has, that's what you're looking for. And actually the regulation says that every year they will publish the efficiency of each vessel on the EU side.
Yeah.
So what are they going to publish?
Yes, Panos, there are also some submissions, one from Germany and other entities, that they are supporting the introduction of efficiency metrics as well. You have seen Japan proposal and different metrics, and there is an assessment by Germany which compares all these measures, the metrics, and they are proposing these metrics to also be introduced, so we need to see the decision.
Yes, thank you. Actually, the key issue in this topic is the reporting of cargo, and indeed the purpose of the EU regulation is different from the one aimed at IMO, and we really look forward to all the EU submission describing the EU regulation will be welcomed in IMO, because as you know, metrics are also under discussion in IMO, and inclusion of cargo information or not is under discussion, because it may be proven that the reporting of cargo and inclusion of cargo in formulas, energy efficiency formulas, may not show the actual energy efficiency of a ship. So the EU decided to include it mainly for the purpose of comparing different transport modes, while IMO is more aiming at establishing energy efficiency of ship. And what we would like to see is indeed a stepwise approach. First of all, to monitor the CO2 emission of ships, to possibly set reduction targets, and then decide at IMO level if energy efficiency measure, additional energy efficiency measures are needed, and maybe a market-based measure will be needed, but it's not yet to be decided at this stage.
I would like to point out that the official title of the correspondence group, the IMO correspondence group, is correspondence group on efficiency measures, not on the MRV. So all these metrics have been discussed and considered in the IMO correspondence group. This is the scope of the correspondence group of the IMO. and all the EU member states, including Greece, Malta and Cyprus, have submitted a joint paper supporting the idea of an EU-style MRV at global level.
Okay. Do you have any other question? Yes. Then.
Okay, it's working. First, I would like to say I support very much what Panos has been saying, because but at a little bit lower level of force, because I think that the IMO scheme is much more practical one than the European one. I think the European one is collecting information which is only going to be useful to the cargo receivers and shippers, and not to any saving of ecology or ecological factors. But basically, what my question was I wanted to state, first of all, my severe frustration at seeing some of the points that you put up, that Mr. Raptis put up on the screen. First of all, you said that shipping has not paid, was the only sector that has not paid anything. I would like to differ very much with you on that. Shipping has invested billions and billions of dollars in modernizing our fleets, in buying eco ships. I have started my career in 1969, and the cost in fuel oil per ton for cargo carried in shipping has maybe gone down by a factor of over 50%. We have managed to get a much more efficient carriage of cargo and minimizing fuel oil costs as well as your CO2 emissions. So it is the same thing. If Europe has an interest factor of 1 in minimizing emissions, shipping has it by 5, a factor of 5, because for us it's 65% of our daily operating cost. We have much more incentive to minimize things. So believe us, we are not fighting this MRV, but we would like it to be practical. I think the IMO approach has been much more practical than the European one, and I think that the Europeans should be more patient, more patient, and wait for a correct approach, because a rushed approach will only cause damage to the free trade of the industry, and I think that this is going to be a big problem if we don't do it right. Second of all, I was very frustrated by your point about in 2050 the increase of world trade will have absorbed all the gains in efficiency that have been made by the shipping industry. Okay, so what do you expect from us? That makes about as much sense as telling the Germans to stop eating bread and the Americans to stop building cars, and therefore you'll have less world trade, and therefore we'll have less emissions from shipping. We carry 95%, as you probably know very well, 90 to 95% of world trade. If world trade goes up 40%, then our emissions will go up 40% if you just do on those. You have to look specifically in more detail on what's being done by shipping. And I think you'll see that we are investing much time, effort, sweat, and money into this, much more than any of the other players in this game. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from the back. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question concerning QACE. Is the QACE certificate mandatory for a classification society in order to be accredited by EMSA as NRO?
Yes.
May I directly answer to that? Yes, it is mandatory for as a basis for the recognition in Europe, but actually not by EMSA, but by the European Commission. But actually, the QACE certificate is just one part of the annex to the Regulation 391, and as such, it is part of the evaluation of that particular RO then. But so far, I am not fearing that there is in the near future any classification society that is recognized in Europe that that will not get a certificate from us. Thank you.
Having said that, it's 10:45. No, a brief one. Yes.
Just a brief comment. I cannot identify an IMO approach. IMO is an international organization, and it's still discussing the metrics. There is no final decision. There are many stakeholders with different views, so there is no IMO approach. Maybe you have more trust on the IMO process. That's a different issue, but there's nothing decided at IMO level so far. And a brief comment on what you pay as a sector. I didn't say that you don't pay. I didn't say that you don't invest. I said that the shipping sector is the only sector of the EU economy not covered by the EU reduction targets. This is different. And just a number, 15 billion euros, if I remember well, the number is the amount the road transport pays in fuel taxes. Shipping pays 0.
Yes, that's true. Having said that, it's 10:45, it's time for a break. I'd like to thank you all. We'll have a 30-minute break and we'll be back to 11:50 for session 2. Thank you.